Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Jared Sorensen. I want to welcome you to this webinar class. It's an interactive class and I hope that you can participate at the level that you can. I'm sorry that we're not able to be face-to-face in front of each other. If you should have the ability to access the chat box, and then also there should be a video of me, but pay more attention to the slides that I'm going to put up. And if for any reason you have questions or comments, feel free to type them into the chat box. It looks like everybody's on mute right now. But at the end, we will go ahead and we'll unmute and we can answer specific questions. And I also have a couple folks that are going to hopefully, well, at least one that will be joining us. Another one who gave me kind of a brief testimonial. So I have a couple case studies of folks who started out in agriculture without having a ton of capital, with only the desire and the ambition to get started. So again, my name is Jared Sorensen. I'm going to, just as I talk here, go through some of the slides that represent myself and my family. This is my family. We've got 9 children, and we are just very blessed to be able to be parents. So our oldest son is 20 years old, and he recently returned from a mission in Riverside, California. And then this little guy, if you can see my pointer, he's about 20 months old. So 9 of them all together, 6 boys and 3 girls. And here's another picture before all 9 of them were born. I'm blessed to live on a ranch in northeastern Nevada. And I've really, from the time I was pretty young, have loved ranching. I've really enjoyed it and found that it's something that I wanted to dedicate my life to. And from the time that I was about 12 years old, I decided, you know, I really do enjoy this. I want to do it for a livelihood. And when I was about 13, one of our key employees, he had a piece of equipment that fell on his foot and he broke his foot. And he was kind of the guy that was, you know, the main foreman on one of our operations. And so my dad asked me if I'd be willing to fill in for him. And at 13 years old, I took over feeding cattle and also calving out some first calf heifers. And I really enjoyed that. I was homeschooled. And so that gave me the opportunity to get my schoolwork done in the morning and then be able to go and to do the work that I enjoyed outside on the ranch in the afternoon. And it was pretty neat experience to grow up there. When I was 14 years old, I started public school for the first time as a freshman. And I went to high school in the little town of Wells, which is about 20 miles from where we live. And I hated it. I didn't get along that well in school. I had some slight learning disabilities. I was dyslexic and really didn't enjoy reading. And I didn't do that well in school. But more than that, I didn't enjoy the fact that I had to be there all day and I couldn't be home on the ranch working and getting my schoolwork done. So my mom encouraged me to stick it out that year, which I did. And I'm really grateful that I did. It taught me a lot about how to learn, how to interact with other people. But when I started my sophomore year, I said, okay, I'm going to come back home and I'm going to continue my education at home, which I did. And when I was almost 16 years old, I started taking classes from the community college, and they didn't offer animal science classes, which was really of interest to me, but they did offer welding and Spanish, and I enjoyed those subjects, and so those were my dual majors, welding and Spanish. And for the next 2 years, I took classes at the community college, which was about a 60 or 70 mile commute from our home, and finished the community college and enrolled in Utah State University. Went there for one fall semester, and then I said, okay, I want to do something else. I want to go out and get some experience. So from there, I went and I worked on the Deseret Ranch in Florida, which is the largest ranch in the continental United States. I don't know how many thousands of head of cattle they run currently, but at that time, there were about 30 to 35,000 head of cattle. And I was hired as an intern, and also just basically put on a crew, a 3-man crew with a foreman and one other cowboy, and my official position was a cowboy. And so I got to learn about how to ranch in a somewhat of a different environment, completely different environment than where we're at in the desert of Nevada. You know, we were riding in water up to our stirrups sometimes, and alligators and snakes and green grass year round, and it was a different environment. And I gained a ton of skills, and I was able to work under a very competent general manager. And probably the biggest thing that I learned was that I didn't want to work for somebody else my whole life. I wanted to have a place of my own, and I wanted to experience more of the ownership rather than working for. Even though working on the Deseret Ranch, I believed in the cause, and it was actually the first time that I'd ever written a mission statement. The general manager gathered everybody around, from the newest cowboy, which was me, to the oldest foremen and managers that had been there, some of them their whole lives. And we sat down around a table and we hammered out a mission statement for the Deseret Ranch in Florida. And even though I believed in that mission statement, I knew that it wasn't for me to work in a corporate setting forever. So I came back home and I worked that summer for my dad. And then I went and I served a 2-year mission for our church. And I was blessed to be able to go and to serve the people in Colombia, in South America. It was an awesome opportunity and a great experience, and I'm grateful for that experience. So all the things that I'd experienced up to that age, or up to that age in my life, had prepared me. I got home from my mission. I went to another semester of college, this time in Rexburg, Idaho. And I met and I married my beautiful wife, a picture of her right here. And we started, we came home the summer after we met, so I'd only been there 1 semester. And I proposed to her. She said yes. We came and we started working on the ranch. And then my dad asked us if we would stay home that fall semester to be able to help to ship the calves and get the fall work done, weaning and everything. And I said, sure, we'd love to. That's what we want to do. Well, and we never did make it back to school. As things turned out, my parents started caring for their aging parents, and we stayed home on the ranch, and I'm really grateful that we did. Now, the fact that I don't even have a high school education, I don't even have a high school diploma, I don't have a college diploma, but I absolutely believe in education, and I invest heavily in my education, and I encourage other people to invest in their education as well. So don't take the fact that I dropped out of college and even high school to say that education is not important, because it is, but it needs to be the right education. And definitely throughout my experience of growing up on the ranch, I gained an education. It was a very practical education. Well, after my grandparents passed away, my mom and dad approached Selena and me, my wife and myself, and they said, hey, we want to go and we want to serve missions. Unlike my grandpa, who lived on the ranch until he was 97 years old and really never left, my mom and dad decided they wanted to do things a little bit differently. And so they signed up and they were called to serve in Mexico. And I remember Dad asking us if we wanted to do that. And I said, sure, of course we do. This is all we want to do. We'd love to. We'll take on that responsibility. And we did. And so beginning at the age of 22, I began managing a multi-million-dollar ranching operation, knowing a lot about the tactical aspects of ranching, but never having created a cash flow budget, never having sat down across the table from a banker and presenting a plan to be able to get financing. Heck, I hadn't even written a business check when my dad left on his mission. And so really, while I understood the tactical part of it, the business side of it, it was literally a baptism of fire, and it was a sink or swim. And really the only reason, or one of the main reasons that we stayed in business and we kept going, was because my dad and grandpa had created systems that really worked. And also we just had burning desires, and we knew that this was what we wanted to do. This is where we wanted to raise our family. And so as we go through here, just some pictures of our family and of our ranch life and kind of what life looks like on a kind of an average day in the spring and the summer in the Sorensen family. Okay, so at 22, we started management of the ranch. Systems were in place. Things were clicking along. We were going good. And then I attended a school. It was called the Ranching for Profit School, and I'll talk about it later. And it challenged some of my paradigms in that school. And it made me sit down and analyze what we were doing on an economic basis. And so profitability isn't just whether you have cash in the bank at the end of the year, whether you're able to pay off your operating loan or not. It's actually, it's measured in different forms. And I began to realize that there were some flaws in our current business system. No fault of my ancestors, right? What they did worked for them, but circumstances had changed and we had to change with them or become obsolete. And so we began to make some changes. And one of those changes was we began to, rather than put up hay on our irrigated meadows, we intensive graze those meadows, and we would purchase the hay that we needed. We had a pretty significant size, like a 500,000 acre BLM allotment that we ran our main cow herd on in the wintertime. And so we didn't have to feed a bunch of hay anyway. We learned to be more efficient with our labor, and we learned that a lot of the machinery that we had really wasn't needed in this different model that we embraced. And so we began to make some changes. Well, things were clicking along, and then round about 2008, 9, 10, this BLM allotment that we relied on began to be overrun with wild horses, to the point that they were competing for our feed for our livestock. And despite our best efforts to work in a collaborative manner with the agencies, and also taking them to court and spending tens of thousands of dollars to try to resolve the problem, my dad ultimately said, okay, it's time that we need to let this go. And so we did, and that was a significant change for our business. We had to, at that point, readjust what we were doing. So instead of running cattle on the desert and not having to feed them, if we were going to have a year-round cow-calf operation, that meant that we had to feed hay through the winter or stockpile enough feed so that we could winter graze. And I made the decision that we should sell the cow herd and we should go to more custom grazing. And sounded like a great idea at the time. Well, that first couple years after we sold the cow herd and we transitioned, we ran yearling steers, and we suffered pretty significant death loss on those yearling steers, to the point that we didn't make any money, and in fact we lost money that second year that we ran those yearlings. And here I was thinking, you know, man, we got things figured out, things are going to work. And then it was like the rug was pulled out from under me, and I found that we had eaten into a bunch of our equity in our land. Even though we were, you know, on the balance sheet, we were millionaires, we were going broke by degrees. And I was stressed. Things were hard. My health began to suffer. In fact, that fall after we lost those yearlings, I got pneumonia. And I remember thinking how easy it is for these calves that get pneumonia after they're weaned to die, because that's not that I thought I was going to die, but I was really sick, and I was discouraged, and I started to give up hope. I'm like, man, it's not worth it anymore. I doubted my own ability, whether I could do it. You know, that ambition that I had when I was 22 years old, it was slapped in the face by the reality that this is really hard and you don't know what you're doing. And I fell into a state of depression, and I didn't recognize it at first, you know, even though I've had family members that deal with depression, and I come by it honest. It's genetic on both sides of my family. I felt like this was more situational. And it was because I'd taken so much on myself that I just wasn't handling it very well. And kind of the deepest, darkest point came when I remember, and it wasn't even so much a conscious thought, but I remember that there was a time when I looked at all the debt that we had, and there was this crazy idea that came into my head that, hey, you don't have to deal with all that. If you stage an accident, you're worth millions of dollars, and your family can collect on this life insurance. And it almost it almost seemed realistic and reasonable. And there I was, from a guy who had all this ambition starting out to the point that here I was with depression, and the thought of suicide seemed reasonable. What had happened? Well, fortunately, there was a loving mentor who gently took and shook me and said, Jared, look at where you've gone. Look at what you've begun to believe, right? Do you really believe that? Do you really believe you're worth more dead than alive? And I was like, holy cow. Even though I hadn't premeditated suicide or anything like that, the thought had been there and it had gotten in my head and it had been implanted, and I began to believe it. And it kind of incited in me a little bit of what I think is righteous indignation. I'm like, holy cow, if this can happen to me, I'm a church-going person. I study the Word of God every morning. I pray every night. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And how can it happen? And how can I prevent it from happening to others? And so there was a shift, and I'm like, okay, no, that's not a good option. I'm going to choose to live, and I'm going to choose to live with a purpose. And I began to really study and ask, what is this purpose? What is it that God has put me on this earth to do? And I was involved with a mastermind group. A mastermind is a really awesome opportunity to be able to work within a group to define goals. And so what we did is we met 3 times a year, and we discussed each other's businesses. We were all colleagues within the ranching industry. We were all very intimately aware of each other's numbers. Things that you don't just go and share with other people. But it was also, there was enough confidence in there that I confided in them that, hey, I'm dealing with depression. And they encouraged me in that first meeting of the year. They said, hey, Jared, just put your business aside, put it on autopilot for a little bit, get yourself figured out, which I did. And through the help of mentors, a lot of prayers, some healthcare professionals who stepped in some alternative medicine, I figured out how to be able to manage the depression. And I have a ton of sympathy and empathy for other people who are going through it because of it. It wasn't a wasted effort by any means to go through that. And so by the time we came around to our midsummer meeting, it was in July, and it was at one of the folks' ranches in Oregon. And, I need to keep going through my pictures here. So we were up there, and I went for a walk one morning, and I was up on the hillside, and as often I do in the mornings, I'll stop and I'll pray, and I saw the sunrise, and I was again just pondering, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What do I need to be doing with my life? How can I use the resources that I've been entrusted with, the land, the livestock, and the stewardships that I had to be able to do a work that would actually be meaningful and beneficial for my fellow man? And as I sat there and I pondered and I had thought, I'd come from that state where I didn't know if it was worth it to ranch, and really the ranch had been offered on the altar, and I said, I'll give it up. I'll give it up if that's what's right. And I made the decision then, no, it's not right. But that morning on the hillside in Oregon, there was another shift that took place, and it was like I was being asked, do you really want this, Jared? Because you don't have to have it. Somebody else can step in, maybe a family member. Maybe you would be better off to sell it and relieve some of the stress and the burden that you feel like you're carrying. And so I there made the decision, no, this is what I want. And to follow that up, when it was my turn to discuss our business in the mastermind that afternoon, I told those my colleagues there, members of that group, I said, hey, I had kind of a neat experience this morning. And I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I said, I made the decision this morning that I want to keep the ranch. And I said, you guys know the struggles that I've faced, both financially and personal struggles. And I said, I want you guys to grill me with any question that you can come up with. Ask me anything. And if you're not convinced that I'm committed to owning this ranch and making it successful, I will go home and I will sell it. And I just laid it out there. And they were like, I mean, they were kind of shocked. And really thought, you know, and they kind of questioned, Jared, are you just being reactionary? I said, no, I'm not. I said, granted, my wife's not here. I know I've got to go home and talk to her. But she respects me enough that I believe that if I went home and I said it's right to sell, we'll sell. And so at that time, at 40 plus years old, that's when I feel like I made the decision that with the knowledge that I had of how challenging it could be to be a rancher, that yes, this is what I want. And so we just got a warning sign that we might be cut off here in 10 minutes. Usually it will extend here. So I made that decision at that point in my life. Yes, this is what I want to do. And there was a significant shift. And so as we go through and we talk about these differences, while even though I inherited the ranch, I didn't have to go into debt to buy it. I felt like at that time in Oregon, that's when I bought the ranch. Does that make sense? That's when I committed that, yes, this is what I want to do. And so after making that commitment, you know, things clicked along, and and we saw some shifts. It wasn't an overnight change or success, but I felt like I was able to understand and engage and begin to more fully engage in what my purpose was and what my purpose is. And I realized that beyond just raising livestock, there are other things that I'm interested in. One of those things has become soil health. I'm really passionate about soil health. And excuse me here if I'm I might have to restart my PowerPoint here, and we'll get it up and going. So while I just kind of taken for granted up until that time that that, you know, the soil was always going to be there, I began to realize that, hey, I need to be a steward of this soil. And so I did. And I was blessed to learn from some great people. I'm going to open back up here and see if I can share what I had going. All right. Can you guys see that now? Nope, you can just see me. I've got to go and take one more step here. And we're going to share this. I apologize for the delay here. Okay, so soil health. And we began to see some neat things happen on our operation as we focused on soil health. And as we saw the earthworm population increase, we saw wildlife come more onto the ranch. We saw increase in forage, and we began to see that our water cycle was healing. And while those things that I started, you know, when I first attended the Ranching for Profit school years ago, I could see the benefit of that. When I really began to focus on soil health and how it had an effect on our profitability, that's when I really began to see, okay, there's some things that can make a shift. And so we we looked at not only what the forage resource provided for the livestock, but we also looked at how it could enhance for generations to come by sequestering carbon. And we began to integrate more alternative species. And so one of my sons picked up on the Joel Salatin idea of the Eggmobile. And so we're looking at multi-species grazing. And let's see, I'm not able to see the chat box here. If you guys have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and jump on. And okay, there we go. Now I can see it. And so I learned that there's some common principles, and that even though yes, I'd inherited this I'd inherited this place, it was up to me to be a steward over it and to make sure that it was there for the next generation, if that's was in alignment with what God's will was for me. And I felt like it was. And so I came up with some steps here to creating a successful business. And maybe let's see here if I can. Okay, you guys can see the video here. I'm not sure if my wife is still on or not. If you're on, Selena, do you want to see if you can go ahead and extend our time? Normally it does it automatically, but it's coming up with a deal here that says we're going to be cut off in 5 minutes. So worst case, we'll beat the system and we'll all log back in and we'll finish up, which I think you should be able to do. You should be able to click right back on the link. If not, I'm going to jump to, well, you all have my email address, right? Send me a quick email if for some reason we get cut off, and I'll create another link real quick and we'll jump back on. So we're going to jump in. So it's the 7 steps to creating a successful business. First of all, define your unique why. And that's kind of what I did when I was on, when I made that shift in Oregon. And I said, yes, this is what I want to do. It was more than just having a profitable business. It was more than about having a cow herd. It was more than about growing more forage. I realized that what I needed to do could have an impact upon others. And so if somebody asks me, which they have, they might come to me and they say, hey, I want to get started in an agricultural business. I want to know how to do what you do. And pretty much without fail, anyone who has come to me and asked me that, I will ask them this question: why? Why do you want to do this? What is your vision in 3 years? Why do you feel like this is a unique opportunity for you and your family? So start with why. Number 2, find a mentor. And I think if you go here, you can probably log in. So 2, who is a mentor? A mentor is someone who has gone through the system before you have, and they're maybe kind of like a pioneer, or maybe they're just somebody who is ahead of you. So they have some things figured out that maybe you don't. And so as I've looked at some of the things that I want to learn, one of them was livestock marketing. And so I reached out to a mentor in Oklahoma and I said, hey, I want to know what you do. You're successful at it. Teach me. And he's like, well, I don't really know that much. And I said, yes, you do. You own it. You are successful and I want to learn from you. And so he became one of my first mentors. His name is Wally Olson. And he teaches livestock marketing. If you're interested in that, he has classes that are available. But the thing is he didn't have a mentoring program per se. He was just somebody who was successful at doing what I wanted to do. And I sought him out, and I actually kind of had to hound him for a little while to ask him to be my mentor. And I think without fail throughout history, people that are successful have hired mentors. All right. The next idea or principle here is to create a plan or create a template. So what I mean here is not so much a business plan, but it is a plan that that implements what you want to do, right? And hopefully you can when working with a mentor, you can establish, what is that? What is it that you want to do? And you can create, and the reason that I call it a template is because the idea of a template is if it doesn't work on one operation, you can use it somewhere else. And so an experience that I had after I started learning about soil health, I really wanted to implement some of the principles that I had learned from great individuals like Gabe Brown. And so I started to look for an operation to lease that had year-round irrigation, whereas ours is more perennial. Our water dries up in the midsummer, and I thought if I really want to improve these practices, let's go ahead and let's do a year-round, something where I could extend my irrigation season. And so I had this dream that this is what I wanted to do. And I looked at a couple properties, and I didn't come to with the owner, but in the process of looking through those, I created a template. And I realized, okay, under these parameters, if they have a well, if they have a pivot that's in place, if they have already established forage, this is how much I can pay for it. And so I knew what I could pay. And then one day when I was, and I actually set it as a goal also,